In the gleaming towers of Meridian Enterprises, Marcus Taylor built an exceptional career through talent and dedication. But when a new CEO takes over, everything changes. Richard Whitmore has a hidden agenda, systematically removing employees who don't fit his vision of traditional values. When Marcus becomes the target of increasing discrimination, he refuses to go quietly. Instead of seeking revenge, he meticulously documents every incident, building an airtight case that will expose not just personal bigotry but corporate corruption at the highest levels. As Whitmore escalates his attacks, Marcus discovers unexpected allies, including his estranged father, the company's reclusive chairman. Together, they uncover a shocking web of financial fraud, forged documents, and systematic discrimination that threatens everything Meridian stands for. The confrontation that follows will test not just Marcus's professional resolve, but his personal relationships and identity. In a dramatic boardroom showdown, truth collides with power, principles face prejudice, and a company's soul hangs in the balance. Would you stand up against discrimination when your career, reputation, and future are on the line? Hit like if you believe in fighting for justice, and comment below with what you would have done in Marcus's position. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us why integrity always matters in the end. Marcus Taylor adjusted his tie as the elevator climbed to the 37th floor of Meridian Enterprises. At 34, he'd become one of the company's most valuable assets, transforming their marketing division over 6 years from an afterthought into a powerhouse that attracted Fortune 500 clients. The quarterly numbers on his tablet showed another 18% growth, exceeding targets by double digits for the 8th consecutive quarter. "Morning, Marcus," called Eliza from reception. "Those client reports are ready for your review." "Thanks, Eliza. How's Jenny's soccer tournament going?" Marcus asked, remembering the detail from their conversation last week. "She scored the winning goal. I've got pictures to show you later." Marcus smiled genuinely. He'd built relationships throughout the company through this careful attention to details, remembering birthdays, asking about families, and celebrating colleagues' achievements. His team's loyalty wasn't just professional, it was personal. In his glass-walled office, Marcus reviewed his presentation for the afternoon meeting. The Hanover account represented a potential $50 million in annual business. Landing it would cement his reputation and likely lead to the VP position opening next quarter. His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Good luck today, dinner tonight to celebrate, love you." Marcus smiled, typing back, "Thanks, reservation at Giovanni's at 8, love you too." After 6 years together, David knew his rhythms perfectly, when to encourage, when to give space. As a pediatric surgeon, David understood high-pressure professional environments. They'd built a life that balanced ambition with connection, recently purchasing a brownstone they were slowly renovating together. Marcus tucked his phone away as his assistant Raj appeared at the door. "The team's ready in conference room B also. Mr. Whitmore wants to see all department heads at 2 p.m. Marcus nodded, concealing his reaction. Richard Whitmore had been CEO for just 3 months, replacing the retiring founder who'd handpicked Marcus for his current role. Since Whitmore's arrival, the corporate culture had shifted noticeably, more hierarchical, less collaborative. "Thanks, Raj. Let's nail this presentation first." In the conference room, Marcus guided his team through the Hanover strategy. Each person understood their role perfectly, the result of his leadership style that empowered rather than dictated. "Remember, Hanover isn't just buying our services, they're buying confidence that we understand their market position. Rachel, your competitive analysis is exactly what they need to see." By noon, the team felt prepared. Marcus grabbed lunch at his desk, reviewing company performance metrics. Under Whitmore, several inexplicable decisions had altered proven strategies. 3 senior employees, all hired under the previous CEO, had departed. The pattern wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. At 1:55, Marcus headed to Whitmore's office suite. Other department heads clustered outside, all except Jerome from finance and Helen from operations, who'd both been replaced last month. Whitmore's assistant ushered them in. The CEO's office had been transformed from its previous warmth to clinical modernity, all hard angles and monochrome. Whitmore himself stood with his back to them, gazing out at the city below. "Thank you all for coming," he said without turning. "I've reviewed Q3 projections. They're inadequate." Marcus glanced at his colleagues. Their division was exceeding targets by 12%. "I've prepared a new strategic directive," Whitmore continued, finally facing them. His gaze passed over Marcus without acknowledgement. Effective immediately, we're pivoting to high-volume, standardized service packages. The strategy contradicted Meridian's reputation for customized premium solutions, the very approach Marcus had perfected. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "our current high-margin approach is producing record profits. A pivot might undermine." "Thank you for your input, Taylor," Whitmore interrupted coldly. "The decision is made. Implementation details will be distributed tomorrow. Others remained silent. Marcus noted names, making mental calculations about allies versus those who'd fall in line. Back in his office, Marcus documented the meeting in detail, his third such log this month. His law school background had taught him the value of contemporaneous records. He didn't know if he'd need them, but patterns were emerging that concerned him. As he prepared for the Hanover meeting, a company-wide email arrived from Whitmore. Executive team restructuring. 3 more original leadership members were being replaced. All coincidentally had been advocates for the employee resource groups Marcus had helped establish, including the LGBTQ Alliance. Marcus had never hidden his relationship with David, but he'd witnessed enough discrimination to keep his personal life relatively private at work. He focused on results, letting his performance speak for itself. The photo on his desk showed him with his parents and sister, his family support system across the country in Seattle. The only personal item revealing more was the small framed photo in his drawer of him and David at Yosemite last fall. The Hanover presentation went flawlessly. The clients responded enthusiastically to Marcus's team's approach, particularly the customized analytics platform he'd pioneered, the very type of solution Whitmore wanted to eliminate. "Marcus, this is exactly why we came to Meridian," said Catherine Hanover, the company's CEO. "Your understanding of our market position is unmatched." As the clients departed, Marcus noticed Whitmore observing from the hallway, expression unreadable. The CEO disappeared without comment. At his desk, Marcus found a meeting request for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Performance review R. Whitmore. The timing was peculiar. Formal reviews weren't scheduled for another 2 months. Marcus completed his day's work methodically, sending congratulations to his team for the successful presentation. As colleagues departed, he noticed Whitmore in deep conversation with Bradley Pierce, a recent hire who'd been openly critical of the company's diversity initiatives. At Giovanni's that evening, David immediately sensed something was wrong. "The Hanover meeting didn't go well?" he asked, reaching for Marcus's hand across the table. "Actually, it went perfectly, but Whitmore's making changes that don't make sense from a business perspective." Marcus detailed the situation. David listened attentively. "You think it's personal?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I've seen this pattern before at Colton Group." They both remembered how Marcus had been passed over repeatedly at his previous firm despite outstanding results. The lawsuit he'd considered but never filed, the quiet settlement when he resigned. "What about Jonathan?" David asked carefully. Marcus tensed slightly. Jonathan Hayes, the reclusive board chairman, and his biological father remained a complicated subject. Their relationship had been strained since Marcus's mother revealed the truth during his law school graduation. The DNA test had confirmed it, but the few awkward meetings afterward had led nowhere meaningful. "He's been traveling internationally for months. Besides, I've always wanted to succeed on my own merits." David nodded, respecting the boundary. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." Later that night, Marcus reviewed his documentation and prepared for tomorrow's unexpected meeting. He'd learned from experience to control what he could and document what he couldn't. Whatever Whitmore's agenda, Marcus Taylor would be ready. The 9 a.m. meeting with Whitmore started 15 minutes late, a power move Marcus recognized immediately. He'd arrived precisely on time, documentation and performance metrics in hand, and waited patiently in the anteroom while Whitmore's assistant avoided eye contact. "He'll see you now," she finally announced, not bothering to look up from her screen. Whitmore sat behind his imposing desk, reviewing documents that he didn't set aside when Marcus entered. After another calculated 30 seconds, he looked up. "Taylor, take a seat." He gestured to a chair positioned lower than standard, another subtle dominance tactic. "I've been reviewing the Hanover presentation." "They were quite enthusiastic," Marcus replied evenly. "We're expecting signed contracts by next week." Whitmore nodded dismissively. "The approach doesn't align with our new strategic direction. Moving forward, Bradley Pierce will be taking over the Hanover account." Marcus maintained his composure despite the shock. "Mr. Whitmore, my team developed the entire Hanover strategy. The clients specifically mentioned our customized approach as the deciding factor." "Pierce brings fresh perspectives we need," Whitmore interrupted. "Additionally, I'm reassigning your team to standardize our service packages, effective immediately." The directive effectively dismantled 6 years of carefully cultivated client relationships and methodologies. Marcus took a measured breath. "I'd like to understand the performance metrics behind these decisions." "The metrics are irrelevant. This is about company vision," Whitmore replied, his tone hardening. "I need executives who embody Meridian's values properly." The implication hung in the air. Marcus noted the phrasing carefully in his mental log. "And what values would those be specifically?" he asked. Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly. Traditional values, family values, the kind our clients in the Midwest and South appreciate. Marcus nodded, expression neutral despite the coded language. I see, is there anything else? Yes, you're also removed from the leadership committee for Q4 planning. Whitmore slid a folder across the desk. These are your revised objectives. I expect full compliance. After the meeting, Marcus documented every word in his electronic journal, then reviewed the new objectives. They were practically designed for failure, impossible targets with reduced resources. This wasn't just a realignment, it was groundwork for termination. At lunch, Sarah Chen from HR slid into the seat opposite him in the company cafeteria. That was quite a meeting this morning, she said quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Word travels fast. Whitmore's assistant talks. And you're not the only one. Sarah glanced around before continuing. Jerome and Helen were pushed out with similar tactics. Both filed complaints with me before leaving. Did anything come of them? Sarah shook her head. Whitmore has the board's backing, or most of it anyway. She hesitated. Marcus, be careful. Document everything. Already am, he studied her. Why are you telling me this? Because what's happening isn't right, and because you're next on his list. She slid a napkin with a name and number toward him. Employment attorney, specializes in discrimination cases. When Marcus returned to his office, he found his team assembled, looking confused. Bradley Pierce stood at the front, smirking slightly. Ah, Taylor, I was just informing your team about the reorganization, Pierce said. As their new director, I'll be implementing immediate changes. The team looked to Marcus, bewildered. He hadn't even been informed of his demotion. I see, Marcus said calmly. I haven't received any formal notification about this. It's being processed. In the meantime, I need your office for client calls. Pierce gestured toward the door. The shared workspace on 12 should accommodate you. By day's end, Marcus had been relocated to a cubicle, separated from his team with restricted system access. 3 years of project files had been transferred to Pierce without notice. The methodical dismantling of his position was proceeding with ruthless efficiency. That evening, Marcus met with the attorney Sarah had recommended. Lauren Diaz listened carefully, reviewing his documentation. This follows a clear pattern, she confirmed, but proving discrimination without explicit statements will be challenging. Keep recording everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus watched as his responsibilities systematically diminished. Projects were reassigned, his input ignored in meetings, and his team members gradually replaced with Pierce's selections. The few who remained loyal were targeted too, particularly Raj and Rachel, who had been vocal supporters of the company's diversity initiatives. During a leadership meeting where Marcus was seated in the back row despite his seniority, Whitmore announced the temporary suspension of all employee resource groups to realign with core business objectives. The LGBTQ+ alliance Marcus had helped establish was effectively disbanded. After the meeting, Marcus overheard Whitmore speaking to Pierce near the elevators. We're restoring Meridian's proper image, Whitmore said. No more of this progressive pandering. The Taylor problem will be resolved soon enough. That night, Marcus added the comment to his documentation file, now spanning dozens of pages. David found him working late at their kitchen island. You can't keep this up forever, David said gently, setting a cup of tea beside him. Marcus sighed. I know. But I've worked too hard to just walk away. Is it time to contact Jonathan? Marcus stared at his screen. Not yet, this is still my fight. The next morning, Marcus arrived to find his security badge deactivated. At the security desk, a temporary pass was issued, one that restricted his access to only the 12th floor and common areas. His calendar had been wiped clean, his email access limited. The systematic erasure was nearly complete. Marcus arrived at work to find an urgent meeting request from Richard Whitmore scheduled for 2 p.m., immediately following the Caxton Industries presentation. The timing wasn't coincidental. Caxton represented one of Meridian's oldest clients, a relationship Marcus had personally nurtured for years before Whitmore's recent reassignment of the account to Bradley Pierce. Despite his limited access, Marcus had quietly monitored the Caxton situation. Pierce had discarded the customized approach in favor of Whitmore's standardized packages, and preliminary feedback suggested the client was dissatisfied. Marcus documented these developments meticulously in his growing evidence file. At 11 a.m., his phone vibrated with a text from Rachel. Pierce bombing with Caxton, CEO asking why you're not leading presentation. Whitmore livid. Marcus continued his assigned tasks, organizing data for low-priority projects that would likely never see implementation. By 1:30, the office was buzzing with whispers. He opened the recording app on his phone, activated it discreetly, and then tucked the device into his jacket pocket. At precisely 2 p.m., Marcus knocked on Whitmore's office door. Enter, came the curt response. Whitmore stood behind his desk, face flushed with barely controlled anger. Bradley Pierce sat in a corner chair, looking visibly shaken. You wanted to see me, Mr. Whitmore? Marcus kept his tone professional and neutral. The Caxton presentation was a disaster, Whitmore stated flatly. Years of relationship potentially damaged. Marcus nodded. I'm sorry to hear that. How can I assist? Don't play innocent Taylor. Whitmore's voice rose slightly. You deliberately sabotaged Pierce's presentation by withholding critical client information. Marcus maintained eye contact. With all due respect, sir, all client documentation was properly transferred as directed. The CRM contains complete interaction histories and preferences dating back 6 years. Pierce says otherwise. The system logs would confirm my statement, Marcus replied evenly. Additionally, Rachel Henderson from my former team offered to brief Mr. Pierce twice last week. According to her, those offers were declined. Pierce shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Caxton's CEO specifically asked why you weren't handling their account, Whitmore continued. That suggests inappropriate communication outside approved channels. I've had no contact with Caxton since the reassignment, Marcus stated truthfully. Their preference for my team's approach was documented in quarterly reviews before your arrival. Whitmore circled his desk, stepping closer to Marcus. Your performance over the past month has been consistently substandard. The reorganization seems to have affected your ability to function effectively within this company. My performance metrics exceed targets in all areas where I've maintained access and authority, Marcus countered calmly. I've documented each instance where access limitations prevented completion of assigned tasks. Whitmore's composure visibly cracked. Your documentation obsession is noted, Taylor. It reflects a fundamental lack of trust in leadership. I believe in accountability at all levels, Marcus responded. It's how I've consistently delivered results for Meridian. Results, Whitmore scoffed. Your type always hides behind metrics while undermining company culture. Marcus detected the shift in tone. Type, sir? You know exactly what I mean, Whitmore said, lowering his voice. The previous administration may have encouraged your lifestyle choices, but Meridian is returning to core values that reflect our primary client base. The explicit direction of the conversation confirmed Marcus's suspicions. He maintained his professional demeanor while ensuring his phone continued recording. I'm not sure how my personal life affects my professional performance, which has consistently exceeded. Don't be obtuse, Whitmore interrupted. Our clients in conservative regions don't want their accounts handled by people whose lifestyles they find morally objectionable. Pierce looked increasingly uncomfortable but remained silent. That would appear to violate employment law, Mr. Whitmore, Marcus stated calmly. I'm discussing cultural fit, Taylor, not your sexual orientation. Whitmore's attempt at backtracking came too late. Your phone just lit up. Are you recording this conversation? The notification light had indeed activated. Marcus made no move to conceal the device. This is a professional meeting about my performance. I'm documenting it for accuracy. Whitmore's face darkened. Hand over your phone immediately. I'm not comfortable doing that. That wasn't a request. Whitmore extended his hand. Company policy prohibits unauthorized recordings. The employee handbook actually permits recording meetings regarding one's own performance, Marcus corrected. Section 4.3, paragraph 2. Whitmore suddenly lunged forward, attempting to grab the phone from Marcus's pocket. Marcus stepped back, maintaining possession of the device. As he did, the phone's screen activated, displaying a background photo of Marcus and David at a recent charity gala. Whitmore stared at the image, expression twisting with disgust. This is exactly what I'm talking about, flaunting your lifestyle. A photo with my partner is hardly flaunting, Marcus replied, his tone finally showing tension despite his efforts. Your kind always pushes your agenda, Whitmore hissed, abandoning all pretense. I've spent 3 months cleaning up the diversity mess the previous CEO created. Meridian doesn't need employees who put their sexual politics ahead of company interests. Pierce finally spoke. Richard, perhaps we should. Shut up, Bradley, Whitmore snapped before turning back to Marcus. Taylor, you're terminated effective immediately. Gross insubordination and violation of recording policies. Both false allegations, Marcus responded, still recording. And remarkably convenient after your comments about my lifestyle choices and your kind. Security will escort you out, Whitmore said, reaching for his desk phone. Your personal items will be shipped to you. I'll need that in writing with specific cause for termination, Marcus stated calmly, although his heart raced. And I'll expect my final paycheck to include the contractual severance for termination without cause. There is cause, Whitmore growled, and it'll be documented thoroughly. As thoroughly as my recording of this conversation? Marcus asked, finally letting a slight edge enter his voice. Including your statements about my type and kind in relation to my sexual orientation? Whitmore's face flushed deeper. Get out of my office before I have you physically removed. Marcus nodded once. I'll expect formal documentation by end of day. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat in his car in the Meridian parking garage, hands slightly shaking as he stopped the recording and saved multiple copies to secure cloud storage. The security escort had been humiliating but expected, the guards apologetic as they watched him empty his desk of the few personal items that remained. He took several deep breaths before calling David. "It happened," he said when David answered. "Are you okay?" David's concern was immediate. "Yes, no, I don't know." Marcus closed his eyes. He was explicit. "David, I got it all on recording." "Come home," David said gently. "We'll figure out next steps together." As Marcus started the car, his phone chimed with a text from an unexpected source, Sarah Chen from HR. "I heard, not right, not legal. I have copies of Jerome's and Helen's files. Let me know when you're ready to talk." Marcus drove home, anger and determination crystallizing into resolve. The confrontation had finally brought Whitmore's agenda into the open. Now it was time for the strategic response. Marcus sat at his dining room table, laptop open, documents meticulously arranged in precise stacks. 3 days had passed since his termination, and he'd transformed their home office into a command center. Digital evidence was backed up across multiple secure cloud locations, physical documents organized chronologically, and a whiteboard displayed a strategic workflow diagram. David entered with 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside Marcus. "You haven't slept properly in days." "I'll rest when the filing is complete," Marcus replied, not looking up from the legal brief he was reviewing. His law school training, though never formally used in his career, was proving invaluable. "Lauren called again," David said, referencing the employment attorney. "She's concerned about your level of involvement in your own case." Marcus finally looked up. "I'm not trying to be difficult, I just need to ensure everything is properly structured." "I know," David softened his tone. "But you need to trust the professionals you've hired." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the point. Lauren Diaz had an impressive record with discrimination cases, and her initial assessment had been encouraging. "This is one of the clearest cases of systematic discrimination I've seen in years." His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, "Meeting location secure, bringing files plus 2 others." "Confirm," Marcus responded affirmatively. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at a private room in the downtown library, neutral ground where former and current Meridian employees could speak freely. "I should go," Marcus said, gathering essential documents into his briefcase. "Sarah's risking her job by helping me." David squeezed his shoulder. "Just remember, this isn't just about winning, it's about making things right." At the library, Marcus arrived early to secure the room. Sarah entered precisely at 2 p.m., accompanied by Raj and a woman Marcus recognized as Helen Roberts, the former operations head who'd been pushed out before him. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began after introductions. "I understand the risks involved." Sarah placed a flash drive on the table. "HR files for everyone terminated in the past 3 months, 15 employees total. The pattern is clear, 13 were either openly LGBTQ+ or vocal allies." "He was more careful with the documentation than with me," Marcus noted. "What were the official reasons?" "Performance issues, cultural fit, restructuring," Sarah explained. "But the timeline and evaluations tell the real story. Everyone had positive reviews until Whitmore arrived." Helen nodded grimly. "He called me difficult and resistant to necessary changes. My department exceeded targets for 11 consecutive quarters." Raj added, "He's been replacing everyone with people from his previous company, all with similar conservative profiles." Marcus organized the new information into his documentation system. "What's the current culture like?" "Toxic," Sarah replied. "People are afraid, the diversity committees have been disbanded, and there's a new traditional values section in the updated employee handbook." "Has anyone filed complaints?" Marcus asked. 3 did, Sarah confirmed, all quietly settled with aggressive NDAs. Marcus considered this. "So Whitmore knows he's vulnerable. But he has board backing," Helen cautioned. "The chairman hasn't been involved for months, traveling internationally, from what I heard." Marcus carefully avoided reacting to the mention of Jonathan Hayes. "What about other board members?" "Patricia Winters might be sympathetic," Sarah suggested. "She was vocal about diversity initiatives before," Marcus made a note. "I'm filing a formal discrimination complaint with the EEOC tomorrow. Lauren believes we have grounds for a class action if others are willing to join." The group spent the next hour reviewing evidence and developing a timeline. As they prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated. "There's something else," she lowered her voice. "Whitmore's planning to announce a major restructuring next month. There are rumors of significant financial irregularities, unauthorized fund allocations to outside organizations." "What kind of organizations?" Marcus asked. "Political action committees with anti-LGBTQ+ agendas," Sarah replied. "Nothing confirmed, but the accounting team is nervous." After the meeting, Marcus called Lauren to update her on the new information. She agreed to expedite the EEOC filing and begin preparing for possible financial malfeasance claims. Back home, Marcus updated his case diagram with the new information flows. As he worked, David watched from the doorway. "You're building this case like you used to build marketing campaigns," David observed. Same principles, Marcus replied. Identify vulnerabilities, gather intelligence, develop strategy, execute precisely. And what about Jonathan? David asked carefully. Marcus paused, the question he'd been avoiding now unavoidable. His relationship with his biological father remained complicated. After the DNA confirmation during law school, their few meetings had been awkward and ultimately inconclusive. Jonathan had respected Marcus's wishes for independence, never interfering in his career. I don't want to use that connection, Marcus said finally. This needs to be about the principal, not personal relationships. But he's the board chairman, David countered gently. He could end this immediately. And anyone who knew would claim I only succeeded because of him. Marcus shook his head. I've worked too hard to have my accomplishments dismissed that way. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together, Marcus's phone rang with an unknown number. Answering cautiously, he heard Bradley Pierce's voice. Taylor, don't hang up, I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you, Pierce. It's about Whitmore, Pierce insisted, voice tense. Things have gotten worse, I've seen financial records you need to know about, and I'm sorry about what happened, I was wrong. Marcus muted the phone to consult with David, who nodded encouragingly. I'm listening, Marcus said, unmuting. Not on the phone, Pierce replied. Can we meet tomorrow? I'll bring documentation. After arranging a meeting location, Marcus called Lauren to inform her of this unexpected development. Her response was cautiously optimistic. Former allies turning is exactly what we need. Just be careful, it could be a setup. That night, as David slept beside him, Marcus finally opened his email drafts folder and stared at the message he'd started and abandoned multiple times over the past week. The recipient, Jonathan Hayes, the subject line, Situation at Meridian Enterprises. His finger hovered over the delete button before closing the laptop without sending. This was still his battle to fight, strategically, methodically, and on his own terms. Marcus arrived at the agreed meeting location, a quiet coffee shop 10 blocks from Meridian's headquarters, 15 minutes early. He selected a corner table with clear sightlines to both exits and set up his laptop strategically. At precisely 10 a.m., Bradley Pierce entered, looking considerably more disheveled than his usual polished appearance. Thank you for meeting me, Pierce said, sliding into the seat opposite Marcus and placing a manila envelope on the table. I've been documenting everything since your termination, Marcus assessed Pierce carefully. Why the change of heart? Because you were right. Pierce glanced around nervously before continuing. Whitmore isn't just bigoted, he's corrupt. After your termination, I was given access to financial records that didn't make sense, large transfers to external organizations labeled as consulting fees. What kind of organizations? Marcus asked, opening his laptop. Pierce slid the envelope across the table. See for yourself. 3 conservative PACs with explicit anti-LGBTQ+ platforms, over $2.4 million diverted in 3 months. Marcus examined the documentation methodically, comparing it with his existing files. The evidence was compelling unauthorized financial transactions flowing through shell companies back to organizations with direct connections to Whitmore's previous business associates. Why are you bringing this to me rather than the board? Marcus asked. Because Whitmore controls board communications, Pierce explained, and because I found this. He pulled out a spreadsheet printout. A termination list, 32 names, everyone who supported the diversity initiatives or questioned the financial restructuring. My name was added last week. Marcus documented each new piece of evidence, capturing critical details in his case management system. Have you retained legal counsel? Not yet, Pierce admitted. I wasn't sure who to trust. I can recommend someone, Marcus offered, but I need to understand your willingness to go on record with this information. I'll testify, Pierce confirmed. What Whitmore's doing isn't just discriminatory, it's illegal, and it's destroying the company. Quarterly projections show a 31% decline since his strategic realignment. As they continued their discussion, Marcus received a text from Sarah. Urgent, multiple terminations this morning, Raj and Rachel included, meeting in progress to announce new company direction. It's accelerating, Marcus muttered, showing Pierce the message. That wasn't scheduled until next week, Pierce responded, alarmed. Something must have spooked him. Marcus forwarded the information to Lauren, who responded immediately. Come to my office. Bringing in financial forensic specialist. EEOC filing expedited based on new terminations. At Lauren's office, they found not only the attorney but also Sarah, Raj, Rachel, and 4 other former Meridian employees. A whiteboard displayed an organizational chart of Meridian with red marks indicating terminated employees, a visual representation of the systematic purging. The pattern is undeniable, Lauren stated, reviewing Pierce's new evidence. With Bradley's testimony and these financial records, we have grounds for multiple actions: discrimination, wrongful termination, and potentially financial fraud. The forensic accountant, Dr. Miller, examined the financial documentation. These transactions violate multiple SEC regulations. The shell company structure suggests deliberate concealment. Marcus organized the growing evidence systematically, creating clear documentation flows and verification procedures. We need to establish the complete chain of financial authorization. Who approved these transfers? Officially, they required board signatures, Pierce explained, but I found evidence suggesting forgery. The digital signatures don't match previous board authorizations. By evening, the investigation had expanded significantly. 17 former employees had agreed to join the legal action, each contributing additional documentation to the growing case file. The company's performance metrics showed consistent decline corresponding directly with Whitmore's strategic changes. "We're ready to file," Lauren announced after reviewing the consolidated evidence. Class action discrimination suit, SEC financial investigation request, and whistleblower protections for current employees providing evidence. As the group prepared to disperse, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. The screen displayed a name he hadn't seen in months, Jonathan Hayes. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into an empty conference room. "Hello, Marcus." Jonathan's voice sounded tired. "I just landed in New York. I've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," Marcus replied neutrally. "So I've heard. I received some concerning reports about Meridian, board members trying to contact me directly." A pause. "Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Marcus leaned against the wall, conflict evident in his expression. "I've handled my professional challenges independently for years. This was no different." "This is different," Jonathan countered. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports. Whitmore's actions aren't just discriminatory, they're potentially criminal. The company I built is being systematically dismantled." "The company you built," Marcus repeated. "That's precisely why I didn't contact you." This needed to be addressed on its merits, not because of our connection, Jonathan sighed audibly. "Marcus, I've respected your boundaries for years, but this situation affects hundreds of employees and shareholders. We need to discuss it. Can we meet tomorrow?" Marcus hesitated, then agreed to breakfast at Jonathan's hotel. After ending the call, he returned to the main conference room where David had arrived to drive him home. "Jonathan?" David asked, recognizing Marcus's expression. "He's back in New York, wants to meet tomorrow." Marcus gathered his files methodically. "He says board members have been trying to reach him with concerns." "That could change everything," Lauren observed. "The chairman's direct involvement would accelerate the process significantly." Marcus nodded, conflicted. "But it also complicates my position. If our relationship becomes public, people will claim any resolution was based on nepotism rather than the merits of the case." "The evidence speaks for itself," Lauren assured him. "And ultimately, isn't justice for everyone affected more important than perceptions about your career?" That night, Marcus reviewed the complete case file, now containing testimony from 19 former employees, financial documentation of improper transactions exceeding $3.2 million, evidence of forged authorizations, and a clear pattern of discriminatory practices that had damaged both employees and the company itself. As he prepared for bed, his phone chimed with an email alert from an anonymous account at Meridian. "Whitmore destroying documents tomorrow morning. Server room access scheduled 6 a.m. Security cameras maintenance planned. Evidence at risk." Marcus immediately forwarded the message to Lauren, who responded, "Emergency injunction being filed tonight. Court opens 8:30 a.m. Need you there first thing." "So much for breakfast with Jonathan," Marcus muttered to David. The investigation just became a race against time. David looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe it's time to bring Jonathan fully into this. His influence could be what prevents Whitmore from destroying crucial evidence." Marcus stared at his phone, weighing his principles against pragmatism. Finally, he composed a text to Jonathan explaining the situation and requesting his presence at the courthouse tomorrow. The response came immediately. "I'll be there, and Marcus, I'm proud of how you've handled this." The simple message struck Marcus unexpectedly. After years of maintaining professional distance from his biological father, tomorrow would bring them together in a public forum, united by the principles of justice that had guided Marcus's entire career. The courthouse bustled with activity as Marcus arrived at 8:15 a.m., briefcase containing organized evidence files. Lauren waited at the entrance, accompanied by 2 paralegals and Dr. Miller, the forensic accountant. "We filed for the emergency injunction at 6 a.m., Lauren explained, guiding them through security. "Judge Simmons agreed to hear our case immediately given the time-sensitive nature." "Any word from Meridian?" Marcus asked. "Their legal team received notification at 7 a.m. They're scrambling." Lauren checked her tablet. "Our sources indicate Whitmore arrived at headquarters at 5:30, an hour earlier than the scheduled document destruction." As they approached the courtroom, Marcus spotted Jonathan Hayes waiting by the entrance. Despite the years of distance, Marcus immediately recognized the subtle similarities between them, the same analytical gaze, the same composed posture under pressure. Marcus, Jonathan extended his hand formally, respecting the professional context. I've reviewed the complete file Lauren sent over. The situation is worse than I imagined. Mr. Hayes, Lauren acknowledged. Your presence significantly strengthens our position. Before they could continue, Marcus's phone vibrated with a message from Sarah. Urgent, Whitmore called emergency board meeting, claiming you're engaging in corporate espionage, presenting evidence against you. Marcus showed the message to the group. He's creating a counter-narrative. Classic deflection strategy, Jonathan noted grimly. We need to contact the other board members immediately. Lauren divided responsibilities efficiently. Jonathan, reach out to board members. Marcus, prepare for testimony. My team will organize evidence sequentially for the judge. At 8:30 a.m. precisely, they entered courtroom 4B. Judge Simmons, known for her meticulous approach to corporate cases, studied the emergency filing while they settled at the plaintiff's table. At 8:42, Meridian's legal team arrived, 4 attorneys led by Gregory Phillips, the company's chief counsel. He appeared visibly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with Jonathan. Your Honor, Phillips began when proceedings commenced, this emergency filing is procedurally inappropriate and based on unfounded allegations. The allegations include imminent destruction of evidence, Judge Simmons replied evenly. That warrants immediate consideration. Counsel for the plaintiffs, please proceed. Lauren presented their case systematically. The pattern of discriminatory terminations, financial irregularities, and the anonymous tip regarding document destruction. Marcus provided testimony regarding Whitmore's explicit homophobic statements, playing the recording that captured the CEO's discriminatory comments. Judge Simmons listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Dr. Miller presented the financial analysis showing unauthorized transfers, she appeared particularly concerned. Mr. Phillips, she addressed Meridian's counsel, these financial records raise significant questions about corporate governance. Your response, Phillips shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, we've only just received these allegations. We need time to investigate internally. That's precisely what we're trying to prevent, Lauren countered. Our evidence indicates an active effort to destroy documentation. At 10:15 a.m., as the hearing continued, Marcus received another message from Sarah. Whitmore telling board you manipulated financial records to frame him, claims you were terminated for performance issues, several board members expressing doubt. Jonathan, reading the message over Marcus's shoulder, immediately stepped out to make calls. When he returned 10 minutes later, his expression was resolute. Patricia Winters and Michael Chen from the board are on their way, he whispered to Marcus. They've seen enough to question Whitmore's narrative. Judge Simmons concluded the hearing at 11:30 a.m., issuing the emergency injunction. Meridian Enterprises is hereby prohibited from destroying, altering, or removing any documentation related to personnel actions, financial transactions, or board authorizations pending further investigation. Court-appointed monitors will be installed immediately. As they gathered their materials, Phillips approached their table. Mr. Hayes, the board requests your immediate presence at headquarters. The situation has escalated, Jonathan nodded. I'll be there. Marcus and legal counsel will accompany me. The tension in Meridian's executive conference room was palpable when they arrived. 9 board members sat around the table with Whitmore at the head. His expression darkened seeing Marcus enter alongside Jonathan. This is a closed board meeting, Whitmore stated coldly. Non-board members should wait outside. As chairman, Jonathan replied firmly, I've invited them as relevant parties to the discussion. He took his seat at the opposite end of the table. I understand you've made certain allegations against Marcus Taylor, Richard. Whitmore pushed a folder forward. Evidence of corporate espionage and defamation. Taylor has been coordinating with competitors since his termination, sharing proprietary information and fabricating evidence against this company. Marcus remained calm as Jonathan opened the folder, reviewing its contents. The documents appeared to show email exchanges between Marcus and Meridian's competitors, all obviously falsified. These are forgeries, Marcus stated simply. Convenient denial, Whitmore responded. The board should know Taylor has been conspiring against this company for personal revenge after being terminated for legitimate performance issues. Patricia Winters, a senior board member, spoke up. Richard, the court has already issued an injunction based on evidence that contradicts your claims, and frankly, the company's performance has declined significantly under your leadership. Temporary setbacks during necessary restructuring, Whitmore insisted. I've been eliminating inefficiencies and restoring the company's traditional values. By traditional values, do you mean systematically terminating LGBTQ+ employees and their allies? Jonathan asked directly. Because the evidence suggests a clear pattern of discrimination. That's absurd, Whitmore protested. Personnel decisions were based solely on performance and cultural fit. Bradley Pierce, who had been waiting outside, entered the room accompanied by Sarah Chen. With respect, Mr. Whitmore, that's false, Pierce stated. I have documentation proving termination decisions were made based on sexual orientation and support for diversity initiatives. Whitmore's face reddened. Pierce, you're violating confidentiality agreements. This is grounds for immediate termination. Actually, Lauren interjected, whistleblower protections supersede those agreements when reporting illegal activities. The meeting descended into increasingly tense exchanges as additional evidence emerged. Dr. Miller presented his financial analysis showing how company funds had been diverted to anti-LGBTQ+ organizations through shell companies with direct connections to Whitmore. These transactions required board authorization, Whitmore insisted desperately. You all approved them. Michael Chen, another board member, shook his head. I never approved these transactions, that's not my signature. Nor mine, added Patricia Winters, examining the documentation. Whitmore's countermove was failing. As more board members reviewed the evidence, their expressions shifted from skepticism to concern, then to outright alarm. The financial improprieties alone constituted serious breaches of fiduciary duty. In a final desperate attempt, Whitmore turned directly to Jonathan. Hayes, you've been absent for months. You can't just return and overturn strategic decisions, and let's be honest about your real motivation here. He gestured toward Marcus. Everyone should know about your personal connection to Taylor. The room fell silent. Marcus tensed, the moment he'd long anticipated finally arriving. Jonathan met his gaze briefly before addressing the board. Yes, Marcus Taylor is my biological son, Jonathan stated calmly, a fact that has no bearing on the evidence before us. The documentation of discrimination, financial impropriety, and attempted destruction of evidence stands on its own merits. Whitmore smiled triumphantly. So this entire witch hunt is about family loyalty, not corporate governance. No, Richard, Jonathan replied evenly. This is about the systematic dismantling of a company I built on principles of merit, excellence, and inclusion. Marcus and I have maintained professional distance throughout his career precisely to avoid such accusations. His achievements at Meridian were earned through exceptional performance, documented extensively in quarterly reviews prior to your arrival. The board members exchanged glances, processing this revelation. Patricia Winters finally broke the silence. The personal connection is noted but irrelevant to the evidence presented. The financial transactions alone warrant immediate action. She turned to the board secretary. I move for a vote of no confidence in Richard Whitmore as CEO, effective immediately pending full investigation. The motion was seconded immediately. As the vote proceeded, Whitmore's countermove collapsed entirely. The board voted 8-1 for his immediate suspension, with only his personal appointee dissenting. As security was called to escort Whitmore from the building, he pointed accusingly at Marcus. You orchestrated this entire charade, this isn't over. Marcus maintained his composure, saying nothing as Whitmore was removed. The confrontation he'd anticipated had finally occurred, but not as he'd expected. The revelation of his relationship with Jonathan had come and gone, acknowledged but ultimately overshadowed by the evidence of wrongdoing. As the board meeting adjourned temporarily to process next steps, Jonathan approached Marcus privately. I apologize for the public disclosure, he said quietly. It wasn't how either of us would have chosen to address it. Marcus nodded. The truth was always going to emerge eventually. At least now we can face it directly. For the first time in years, father and son shared a moment of genuine understanding, united not by biology but by shared principles of justice and integrity. The countermove had failed, but the true reckoning was still to come. The Meridian Enterprises boardroom had been transformed overnight. Where chaos had reigned the previous day, order now prevailed. Temporary name placards had been replaced with permanent ones, documents were meticulously arranged before each seat, and the company's founding principles, framed but recently removed under Whitmore's direction, had been restored to their place on the wall. At precisely 9 a.m., the emergency board meeting commenced. All 11 board members were present, along with key stakeholders, Lauren Diaz and her legal team, Sarah Chen representing HR concerns, Bradley Pierce as a primary whistleblower, and Marcus Taylor seated not as an employee but as a central figure in the proceedings. Jonathan Hayes called the meeting to order. Before we begin formal proceedings, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances that bring us together. Meridian Enterprises was founded on principles of excellence, integrity, and inclusion. Recent events have challenged those principles, and today we determine our path forward. The first 2 hours were dedicated to financial oversight. Dr. Miller presented his completed forensic analysis, revealing the full extent of Whitmore's financial malfeasance. $4.7 million diverted through shell companies to organizations with explicit discriminatory agendas, fraudulent documentation, and manipulated performance metrics designed to justify the termination of targeted employees. The pattern is unambiguous. Dr. Miller concluded. Financial resources were systematically redirected to support Mr. Whitmore's personal ideological agenda, while performance data was manipulated to create pretexts for discriminatory terminations. Next came the human resources audit. Sarah Chen presented a comprehensive analysis of personnel actions under Whitmore's leadership. Of 64 terminations in 3 months, 57 targeted employees who were either openly LGBTQ+ or documented allies, Sarah reported. Performance reviews were retroactively altered to support termination decisions. Meridian's diversity metrics, previously among the industry's strongest, declined by 64% during this period. Bradley Pierce then testified regarding Whitmore's direct instructions. He explicitly stated that employees who didn't align with traditional values should be identified and removed through any means necessary. When I questioned the legality, he said the board supported his vision of cleaning house. Multiple board members visibly reacted to this revelation. Patricia Winters addressed her colleagues. I want to state unequivocally that the board never authorized, explicitly or implicitly, any discriminatory actions. This misrepresentation compounds Mr. Whitmore's misconduct. As the evidence mounted, Lauren Diaz outlined the legal ramifications. Meridian faces potential class action lawsuits, SEC investigations, and significant reputational damage. However, the company's response today will significantly impact both legal outcomes and public perception. After a brief recess, Jonathan Hayes addressed the most sensitive aspect of the proceedings. Before we continue, I must acknowledge a personal matter that Mr. Whitmore attempted to use as a diversion. Marcus Taylor is indeed my biological son, a fact we've both maintained as private to preserve professional objectivity. He continued with careful precision. Mr. Taylor built his career at Meridian based solely on his performance, which is extensively documented. Our relationship does not diminish the evidence presented, nor does it change the fundamental legal and ethical breaches that occurred under Mr. Whitmore's leadership. Michael Chen spoke for the board. The board appreciates your transparency, Jonathan. We've reviewed Mr. Taylor's performance history, and it's clear his success at Meridian was earned through exceptional results. The relationship disclosure has been noted, but is immaterial to our deliberations regarding Mr. Whitmore's conduct. With the personal matter addressed, the board moved to final considerations. Lauren presented 3 options: contest the allegations through litigation, negotiate settlements with affected employees, or pursue comprehensive remediation including reinstatement, compensation, and systemic reforms. After thoughtful discussion, the board unanimously approved a resolution with 4 key components. 1. Immediate termination of Richard Whitmore for cause, with clawback provisions for bonuses and benefits. 2. Reinstatement offers to all employees terminated under discriminatory pretexts, with back pay and damages. 3. Implementation of enhanced governance protocols, including independent oversight of personnel decisions. 4. Establishment of a board-level diversity committee with binding authority over corporate policy. As the formal proceedings concluded, Jonathan turned to Marcus. The board has a separate matter to address. Given your documented performance and the clear evidence of wrongful termination, we're offering immediate reinstatement to your previous position, with appropriate compensation for damages incurred. Marcus had anticipated this moment, carefully considering his response. I appreciate the offer and the board's decisive actions today. However, my reinstatement shouldn't be addressed separately from the other employees who suffered similar discrimination. I request that my case be processed through the same channels as everyone else affected by Mr. Whitmore's actions. Jonathan nodded with quiet approval. Your request is noted and will be honored. The standard reinstatement process will apply equally to all affected employees. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached Marcus individually, offering personal apologies for the company's failure to prevent Whitmore's discriminatory actions. Patricia Winters was particularly forthright. We failed in our oversight responsibilities. Your dignity throughout this process has been remarkable. In the atrium outside the boardroom, David waited with several former colleagues. As Marcus emerged, their silent nods conveyed what words couldn't: recognition of justice served, not through vengeance but through systematic, principled action. Sarah approached with a tablet displaying her phone screen. It's already hitting the business news. Meridian Enterprises takes decisive action against discrimination. The company's stock has risen 4% since the announcement. Later that evening, Marcus and David sat on their brownstone's rooftop terrace, finally processing the whirlwind of events. So, David asked, will you accept reinstatement when it's formally offered? Marcus gazed at the city skyline. I'm not sure yet, Part of me wants to return and help rebuild what Whitmore tried to destroy. Another part wonders if it's time for something new. Whatever you decide, David assured him, you've already accomplished something significant. 57 people will get justice because you refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable. Marcus's phone chimed with a message from Jonathan. Dinner tomorrow, just father and son, no business. David glimpsed the message. You should go. Some relationships deserve a second chance. The next morning brought an unexpected email from Lauren. The SEC had opened a formal investigation into Whitmore's financial activities, and 3 other companies where he'd previously served as an executive were now reviewing their practices. The systematic discrimination at Meridian had been stopped, but the ripple effects were just beginning. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the Meridian lobby, observing as previously terminated employees returned to their positions. Rachel and Raj greeted colleagues with emotional hugs. The diversity committee plaques had been restored to their prominent positions. A new statement of principles hung beside the company logo, excellence through inclusion. Jonathan approached, standing beside his son. The board approved the new ethics framework unanimously, and the diversity committee has been established with binding authority. Systemic change, Marcus observed, not just individual consequences. That was always your approach, Jonathan acknowledged. Seeing the bigger picture beyond personal grievances, I wish I'd recognized that quality in you sooner. As they watched the company's renewal unfold before them, the distance between father and son, maintained for years through mutual caution, had begun to dissolve. The painful confrontation that brought them together had ultimately created space for reconciliation, not through dramatic gestures but through shared principles finally recognized. Marcus had arrived at Meridian that morning still uncertain about his future with the company, but watching the transformation underway, the systematic rebuilding of what had nearly been destroyed, he felt the answer becoming clear. His battle hadn't been merely personal, it had been about establishing that discrimination couldn't be normalized, even when disguised as corporate culture or traditional values. The true reckoning wasn't just Whitmore's downfall or Marcus's vindication. It was the establishment of systems that would make such discrimination harder to implement in the future. It was the creation of accountability structures that transcended individual leadership. It was the demonstration that principles of inclusion weren't just moral ideals, but fundamental to sustainable business success. As employees gathered for the company-wide address announcing the new initiatives, Marcus took his place not as an outsider seeking justice, but as an architect of necessary change. The path forward would require continued vigilance, but the foundation had been laid for a workplace where excellence and inclusion reinforced rather than competed with each other. The reckoning was complete. The rebuilding had begun.